Where do you live, Forrest?
14 Nixon Street, Hoosick Falls.
Were you born in Hoosick Falls, or you lived here forever, or what?
No, I was born in Grafton, New York.
I see. And what age did you come to Hoosick Falls? Approximately.
I come to Hoosick Falls, I guess I was about 25.
Oh, it was 25 when you came.
But I didn't live here all the time.
I see. But you left for the service from Grafton then?
Yeah.
I see. All right, what about your life when you lived in Grafton? I mean, where'd you go to school and some of the things
I went to school most of my life in Grafton and Petersburg. I lived in Petersburg for a while.
I see.
Yeah.
And tell us a little about how you got into service. I mean, what happened?
Well, it come my age, I suppose, did it, and they wanted to see how my health was doing, so I had to go to Doc Shaw here in town to start with, and he gave me eye examinations, and he went through the whole procedure of examinations and wrote it down, and the next thing you know, I got a notice through the mail that I was drafted.
I see.
So then I had to come up to Hoosick Falls with a bunch of other people, and I wound up going into service in that way.
I see, and that was in 1942.
Yep.
Was it in spring, winter, or do you remember? Or is it...
I think it was in the early spring.
I see, spring of 42.
Yeah.
All right, and what happened when you got drafted?
Well,
where did you go?
I got drafted, went to New York and was only there just a short time, and they shipped us to Louisiana. And from Louisiana, we went to Florida.
I see. Did you take basic in Louisiana?
Yeah, basic in Louisiana, and we went to Florida, and I was assistant driver on our truck of the company.
I see. And what kind of a company were you in?
Just infantry.
Infantry?
Yeah.
With the infantry.
Yeah.
You're a truck driver with the infantry?
Yeah, well, I was assistant truck driver.
Okay.
And I was assistant to whatever he had to do. I was the same. Not continually, because at the end of the day, I was back normal. And we went from there to Virginia, and we only stayed there a little while, and then we had to go to Boston. And from Boston, we were shipped overseas. And I'll never forget overseas because I got seasick, and I mean seasick.
All the way over, huh?
I was so sick, I was willing to die for it.
I see.
But anyway, I got through that.
And where did you land? In England?
Yeah. Anyway, we went, after we got over there, we was there for 2 days, I guess, and I got a message to report to the company. The man that was in charge, and his name was Kemp, Captain Kemp. And I went in there, I was seasick all the way over, and on land I was seasick too. And I thought something wrong with me, so I walked in the office, and there's a guy hunched over, and it was a Captain McBride, and he looked at me, he said, "You seasick too?" I said, "Yes, I am." And from there, we stayed in an old mining camp over in Wales, South Wales. Yeah. And after we stayed there for a while, we got a notice that there's a possibility that we might be going into action over in France. So it wasn't only a few days. I was still assistant mechanic, and we had 19 Jeeps and a bunch of trucks to take care of. And the guy that was in charge, he got going out to parties and one thing and another, and he wouldn't take care of his job, what he should do. He even had a dirty rifle, and I tried my best to, to keep up, to help and everything, but all of a sudden, the colonel came through, and he had an inspection, and he found a few things that was real bad that I didn't even know about. And so everything was going along, and all of a sudden I heard my name. The guy said, I was corporal then, he said, Corporal Smith? And I said, yes. He said, the company commander wants you, and I mean right now. So I said, what the heck did I do, you know? So I went in and saluted him, and he said, Smith? I said, yes. He said, I want to ask you a question, and I want the absolute truth. I thought, what's coming now, you know? He said, if I should make you in charge of all these vehicles in combat, do you think you could take care of it? Well, what a surprise, you know. I said, sir, the only thing that I can say to you is I do the very best I could. He discharged me, and I went back, and I thought, oh, that'll probably be the end of that. But about a half an hour, I heard my name again, the same officer. So I said, yes, I'm here. He said, well, come on out here, I want to see you. So I went out, and he had sergeant stripes, and he said, here, get these stripes there on. From now on, you're in charge of these vehicles.
Great story.
Well, I felt bad because I was friends with the guy that was in charge, you know. Well, what happened was they busted him and shipped him out. And then the next thing I got was information that it wouldn't be only a few days we might be going into France. And we got a notice to move, and we just moved closer to the water, that's all. Yeah. And we stayed there, I think, about 4 days, and all of a sudden we got the notice we was going to ship over into France. Well, we went, and while I was sitting out waiting in the bay, the airplanes came over and made a big bombing raid, and the water was shaping just like that from it. Yeah. So then we went into France. And
was that at Normandy, or?
Yeah, that was in Normandy.
So you were on the waves into Normandy?
Not the main wave, that had already hit.
The following.
Yeah.
Bringing in the jeeps and stuff to follow up.
So we went in.
About how many days after Normandy? Do you know? Was it weeks? Or?
I would say probably 15 days.
I see. After Normandy.
Yeah, after Normandy.
I see.
Because there was still activity going on. We went in sort of in the north of where it was actually going on. We wound up in a Hurricane Forest, and there's where we really had a battle. I, of course, didn't do any fighting. I had to take care of the vehicles. It turned out that when everybody was on rest period, that's when I had to work. I had 19 Jeeps and my own 3/4 ton, plus the 2-ton trucks from I and K Company to take care of. And we had a truck from Anti-Tank that joined up every once in a while, and I had to take care of that one.
I see.
But I had a number of people. I had 3 or 4 guys that they understood mechanics pretty well, and they helped out real good.
I see.
And then the next thing like I say, we went into the Hurricane Forest and started in. We had to dig a hole to sleep in every night. You didn't dare sleep on top of the ground. And one night, I guess it was about the 4th or 5th night we were there, we heard a noise, and there were troops coming in, walking. And they had walked 15 or 20 miles that day, and they were tired out. They had orders to dig in for the night. They were so tired that they decided to sleep on top of the ground. Well, it didn't pay off. They got shelled that night. They dropped bombs. They killed, I think, 7 or 8 people. I don't know exactly. And of course, I wasn't too far away. I guess maybe a mile from that. And I heard it, and it sure jarred the ground pretty much. And from then on, we went on farther.
As the troops went, you moved up with
troops went. See, I was always behind.
Right. Keeping the vehicles going.
Yeah, with the vehicles.
Yeah.
And some of the sergeants that was in charge of the vehicles. The main guy, his name was Scheiball, Sergeant Scheiball. I had to dig a hole for both of us to sleep in because he had to go around and in place all of his sergeants and corporals that was in charge of the vehicles. He had to in place them, and while he was doing that, I had to be digging a hole for both of us.
She dug a lot of holes, right?
Yeah. And we had a guy, I don't remember what his name was, of course, but he took care of the 50 caliber machine gun. And he was told to set that machine gun up, but do not, strictly, do not fire it at bombers. If a plane came through strafing, a fighter plane, you could fire at it, but do not fire at the bombers. Well, when the bombing raid came, he fired at the bombers. One of them, I don't know how it happened, but one of them went out and came right back and dropped one almost identically right top of his. He run like the devil, jumped in a hole with somebody else.
He showed them where they were.
There was no gun left the next morning, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And then we went on, like I say, further on in the Hurricane Forest. And it wasn't long before General, I can't think of his name now, but a general came through, and they didn't want him to have an attack. They wouldn't give him any gas for his vehicles or anything, so he came and got a tank of gasoline from all of our vehicles to put on his tanks.
Oh, Patton.
Patton, now you got it.
That's
General
right.
Patton.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, he made one more push with the gas he got from all of us. And from then on, the war expanding into farther into Germany.
Did you get into Germany?
Yeah, I got into Germany. And we had a guy, a young fellow from Holland, I think he was. He didn't belong to the service, but he was old enough so he was going to be taken into service, so he run away and he joined us. He stayed with us for about 6 or 8 months. He could talk pretty good English. And while it was going on, he visited with some of our guys and got quite friendly, you know, enough so he could talk and visit with them. And they got talking one night, and he said, well, I gotta go, I got a date. I said, what do you mean, a date? Well, he said, I have a date with a young lady. And he said, anytime I want to sleep with one of these young ladies, says I go knock on the door, and she answers the door, I'll tell her what I want. He said, they slam the door right in my face sometimes, but he said, sooner or later I get one that says, come on in.
That's quite a story.
Yeah. And anyway, he used to say to us, what ain't worth asking for ain't worth having. And we went on from there until more or less toward the end of the war, and we were more or less in one position.
Did you get caught up in the Battle of the Bulge?
I was not in the battle part, but I was in the area.
Where it was?
Yes.
Because that was the last push the
I was
Germans
there in the
did.
Battle of the Bulge for quite a while, as long as it lasted. A number of our guys, of course, got killed. But all I had to do, like I said, my job was taking care of the vehicles, make sure they run properly. But I had drivers that were good drivers. If they had anything that was wrong, or if they thought there was something acting up, they'd report it to me, and I'd right away take care of it. In fact, when we were traveling on the roads, I used to stop and see blowed up vehicles and take parts off from them.
Oh, really?
You know, carburetors and distributors and different things, and keep them in my truck.
You had a big...
You weren't supposed to do it, because when you had inspection, you had to hide them so you didn't have them. In fact, it brings to mind Colonel Blanton. He was in charge of the area. he put out an order for everybody that had a bayonet, get it sharpened. Well, no regular guy had anything to sharpen a bayonet, so it wound up, but I had to do it. So I sharpened quite a few bayonets, and all of a sudden one day we got a notice through the commander that Colonel Blanton was coming himself, make an inspection. So I had to get my tools cleaned up and everything, you know, and get ready for him to show up.
Yeah.
Well, he showed up and he was inspecting everybody, and finally he came to my vehicle, and I had the tarp pulled back, and he climbed up on the back and pulled the drawers out and looking at the tools, and all of a sudden he pulled one out and there was a bayonet in there. And he said to me, "Sergeant Smith, where does this fit on a vehicle?" Of course, I knew what he was up to. I said, "Sir, it don't fit on the vehicle, and it's there because you ordered it." "What do you mean I ordered it?" "You ordered them cleaned and sharpened." And I said, "Who else had anything to do it with but me?" So I said, "That's the last one of the company to be done, and I didn't get to sharpen it yet." "Oh, okay, okay."
Then he thought it was all right, huh?
It's all right. I found out one thing, that if an officer, a high-grade officer, a major or somebody like that, started yakking at you, if you talked right up to him and not act skittish, he'd be gone in no time. But anyway, that turned out fine as far as that part was concerned.
Then you went up into Germany until the war
Then we
was...
went into Germany, and it wasn't too long before we got notice that there's a possibility that the war might be over. And we were supposed to go into Kassel, but we never made it there under the fighting conditions. But later on, we got notice to get everything packed up that the war was going to be over. And so I used my truck for some of the guys. They had seats on each side in the back beside the toolbox. We took the toolbox out and just left it so people could sit in there. And we joined another group, anti-tank, and M Company, they got a hold of some K Company. Anyway, we started in an area. We didn't know where we were going, we just had to follow the rest of them. So we went for, I would say, close to 100 miles. And everybody said, "Well, where are we going anyway?" Well, somebody said we were going to Kassel and get rid of our vehicles and leave enough to ride back to camp where we come from. And there's all different stories that come out, what we were going to do and what we wasn't going to do. Well, finally, we got into an area that was kind of plugged up a little bit, and we had to slow down. Well, I wasn't driving. My assistant driver was driving the car. We'd been going, like I say, 100 miles or so. His name was Butler. I said, "Bill, you drove quite a while. It's about time we switched drivers, because we didn't know how far we were going farther on." So we switched, and all of a sudden we looked and see the group had started moving. So I put the vehicle in first gear and just started to step on the gas, and a little kid, 3 years old I would say, jumped in front of me. And the differential hit him in the chest and the bumper in his head. So I stopped that just like that, and I got out, and he was stiffer than a poker underneath, and I got a hold of him and pulled him out. And at that time, a vehicle drove up with 2 officers in it, and they stopped to see what was going on. So I took the little kid, and I walked over to him, and I said, "I take it you're in this area?" And he said, "Yes, why?" I said, "Would you take this little kid to the hospital or do something?" I said, "He jumped in front of me, and he got hit. And while we were talking, he come to and was going through their pockets for gum and candy and everything. So that helped, you know.
Made you
So
feel
they
better.
said, we'll take care of it. Well, I went on, and I'd be darned, we only went about 4 blocks and left the vehicles right there. Not realizing, they wouldn't tell you where.
Yeah. And that was in Castle?
That was in Castle, Germany.
I
Well,
see.
then we had to take all the drivers that was left without vehicles, they all loaded them in, you know, in a vehicle. Each one had a vehicle that could spare, and we drove back to our own area, which was, it took quite a while, the rest of the day. But I never forget that little kid.
Yeah.
Just, we only had it in first gear, and he jumped right off the bank, right in front of me. Yeah,
It was impossible stuff.
yeah, it's just one of those things.
All right. And then you went back, and what happened? Then there was
Well,
getting,
then
going
we
home?
went back, we finally went, we come to a crossroad, and there was a guy directing traffic, and he said, you can't go this road, you'll have to take another one because it got bombed out. It's in bad shape. So we went in another direction, and we just followed the convoy through, and it wasn't too long before we got in our own area. And then when we got in their own area, each one got out, and we told where our camp was, and we wound up in our own company.
I see.
Well, I got out, and I went in, and I wanted to report to the captain, Captain Lindbergh, his name was at that time. I wanted to report to him about the little kid, you know, jumping in front of me and getting hit. And I started to report, and he had a big grin on. He said, I knew that 2 days ago. He said they got in touch because they took my name and serial number and my Jeep, or my truck and everything. And they got in touch with the company before we got back and told them what had happened. I kind of forgot one thing. There was one spot we were driving over there that had wooden pavement. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Plank road like.
Well, it had wooden blocks as pavement.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was early in the morning, and it got frosty. And we was going down this bank, and I had to run the truck 1/2 of it up on the bank because it was so slippery. And there was an anti-tank guy ahead of me. He was hauling a tank gun. And it was so slippery, that gun was whipping like this. And all of a sudden, here comes a poor old man riding a bicycle on the other side, and that gun swapped him right up against the wall and killed him. Just like that. Those are the things you remember.
Yeah, right. All right, so you came back, and then the war was almost over.
Yeah.
Then it got over, and what happened?
Well, then we just settled down and back more or less taking things easy. Then what we had then is everything we had left cleaned up and inspected, and the usual thing that there's afraid you was going to wouldn't have nothing to do and get into mischief, I guess.
So they
or
got to
something.
keep you busy.
Then keep you busy, yeah.
All right, and then how long before you shipped home?
Well, it wasn't too long. We had to go through quite a few inspections, and we had to have shots again, different kind of shots that was going around at the time. One of them made me sick for a couple of days, but things weren't normal to us because we were, you know, usually something right ahead of you all the time to be done. Now it was back, you know, then all of a sudden we got a notice that we was going to move and get ready to go back on ship to go back home.
I see. So then you got on ship and came home, and
We got on
where
ship.
did you get off the boat? You remember Boston, New York, or?
No, I think it was Boston again, yeah.
Okay, and then you got out. Then they discharge you right away, or?
Then I had to go to camp again, another camp, and from there we got shipped 2 or 3 different places for, sometimes for inspections of certain things that you had, and sometimes it was just to ask you questions like you're asking now about an area you were in, a lot of things like that. Then all of a sudden, right out of a clear sky, they said, well, tomorrow, anybody that's going to the U.S., get ready because you're going to go. And I thought to myself, oh boy, I'm going to get seasick again.
Oh yeah, you gotta come over that.
But I didn't. But when we were going over, we ran into a storm.
I see.
And that storm really upset us, and we were double loaded. One had to sleep on the floor at night, and the other in the bunk. And the next night, exchange.
Right.
Well, I was so seasick, the guy that was changing with me said, look, you keep the bed all the way over. I can make out right on the floor.
That was nice of you.
He said, I can see that you're really sick. We
Right.
had one fellow, we couldn't find him. We thought he fell overboard. He went way up on the top of the ship and found a toolbox, put a blanket in it, and climbed in there. Nobody knew where he was.
Oh, he was that
They
sick.
thought he
Yeah.
went overboard.
All right, so then they stuck you on ships and you came back to America. You're lucky you weren't sick. And what happened to you in the United States then?
Well, when we come back to the United States, we went back to our old area.
The Pacific War was still on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Pacific War was still on. And we had notification before we got off the ship that there's a possibility that we would go to Japan and be shipped out. Well, then about that time they dropped the atomic bomb over there, and that changed things all around.
In a hurry.
So then they come out, and if you'd spent so much time,
Got points.
yeah, if you'd spent so much time in the service, and they ask you questions of what you did, you know, and who you were and all that stuff. And it wound up that there was no way of sending us over, because one thing, my age was against it at that time, and we, I think we changed officers too. We had this Captain Lindbergh, and I think we got another officer, because Lindbergh he was expecting to get advanced higher. So they had another officer that took his place for a while. He was in the area because before we got ready to get on board ship to come back here, he came around and said goodbye to everybody that he could think of. He was very good officer.
All right, so now you're in the States and you got points. You had enough points to get out?
I had enough points so that I could get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we never asked you in the beginning, how old were you when you were in the service?
Oh, I think I went in the service when I was 28.
Oh, you were 28 when you went in the service.
You know how old I am now?
No, how old are you now?
I'll be 87.
Oh, that's great for you. 87.
I'll be 87 my next birthday, which is next May. And I got a story to tell you about that.
Yeah.
I'm actually 88. When I was born, my people owned property in Babcock Lake. We lived on the Brunstool property. And my father owned the part of the lake about, maybe 300 feet out in the water where the line was. And he got sick. And that's where I was born. And I was a twin. My twin died. But being that there was that far back in the country, they didn't get a hold of a doctor very much, you know. So when my twin died, my father, he got sick too. They decided to get rid of the place and move away. Well, I was born in May 25th. And they moved down in the Petersburg area. But they never put down anything about me and my twin being born until the next year.
I I see, so they had a year's
because
mess
there
up.
was so much going on.
Yeah.
And they made a boo-boo, and when they put it down in 1913,
I see,
which actually it was 1912.
I see.
Well, that went on for quite a while, and then one time when I was down in the city, my father got sick, and I was 15 years old at that time, and you could get a junior's license at 16. And the father said, I wish you had your license. I could drive around on a farm or anything, you know, with no problem. So he said one day, he said, come on, we'll go down and see the doctor when Drew was born. He had an office in Troy. And so we went down and got his records out, and his records showed 1912.
So you were able to get your license?
And so he gave me the papers, and I turned them into the Motor Vehicle Bureau, and I got my junior's license.
All right, let's go back now. You're back in the United States, you got discharged, you came back to where?
I think we came back to Boston.
Were you married at that time?
No.
No, okay.
No.
All right, so you came,
we corresponded all the while through the war.
I see. And where was your wife from?
She was from Potter Hill.
From Potter Hill?
Yeah.
Okay, and what was her maiden name?
Mina, M-I-N-A.
M-I-N-A, all right.
Helen Mina.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you got married after you came home.
Got married after I came home.
How many children did you have?
Huh?
How many children did you have?
Well, 4 years later, the first kid was born.
I see.
And we've had 2 kids since. Now one of them is 50, the other one's 47.
Right. Yeah. And as I told you, I conversed one of your sons in San Diego over email.
Oh, yeah.
And we've
yeah.
written to each
Yeah,
other, so I know.
he told me about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And what did you do for a living in between after you got out of the service? And I mean, I knew you, but what did you
Well, everybody tried to get me to have a job here and there and different places. And before the war, I worked down in Troy to the Lion Brand Shirt and Collar Company, and I drove back and forth. I rode back and forth with somebody, or I drove myself. And it got so, the job I had was running presses, and sometimes the night come, you was real tired. And to think you had to drive 32 miles to get home, it kind of got on you, you know.
Yeah.
So when I went to get another job, I said to myself, I'm going to try to get a job local, and then 4 or 5 miles away is all right. So I wound up in Noble and Wood,
I see.
and I worked in Noble and Wood all them years.
I see. And that's where you retired from, Noble Wood, or?
No, Noble and Wood was sold out,
Yeah.
and I went to the specialty for a while, and that didn't turn out good because well, you know, they pulled off different capers on me, which the help told me they shouldn't have done it. So finally I got a job over to school.
Yeah, right, I know. I remember when you worked
I
on
worked over to school until I got done work and tired.
How long did you work at school?
3 years.
I see. Yeah, I remember when you worked down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so that brings us pretty well up to now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we thank you. That was a very interesting story.
Well,
And we thank you very much for
there's probably a lot of things that I just can't remember.
I know, but you told a good story. We know where you were. I know a lot about you, Forrest.
Well,
And thank you a lot.
you're entirely welcome.